My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But that night, everything shattered. The one person I trusted the most betrayed me in a way I can never forget. This is the story of how the man who was supposed to protect me became my worst nightmare, and how 15 years of silence nearly destroyed everything I held dear. Before we continue deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about trust forever. This story begins 23 years ago in a small town in Ohio, where a little girl named Sarah Michelle Thompson was born into what seemed like the perfect American family. But sometimes, the people closest to us harbor the darkest secrets. Sarah grew up in a house filled with Sunday dinners, backyard barbecues, and family traditions that stretched back 3 generations. Her father, Robert, worked at the local manufacturing plant, while her mother, Linda, taught elementary school. But if you asked Sarah who her hero was growing up, she wouldn't hesitate to say it was her uncle Michael. Michael Thompson was Robert's younger brother, and everything a little girl could want in an uncle. At 35, he was the bachelor of the family, the one with time to spare, the one who never missed a school play or birthday party. When Sarah scraped her knee riding her bike, it was Uncle Michael who cleaned the wound and told her she was brave. When she had nightmares, Uncle Michael was the one who would sit by her bed and tell her stories until she fell asleep. He was my protector, Sarah would later recall. When other kids at school were mean to me, Uncle Michael would take me for ice cream and tell me I was special. He made me feel safe in a world that sometimes felt scary. The bond between Sarah and her uncle grew stronger each year. While her parents worked long hours to make ends meet, Uncle Michael filled the gaps. He picked her up from school, helped with homework, and took her to movies her parents were too tired to attend. As Sarah entered her teenage years, Uncle Michael remained a constant presence. He was the one who taught her how to drive, the one who scared away boys he deemed unworthy, and the one who gave her confidence when she felt awkward and out of place. He knew everything about me, Sarah remembered. My dreams, my fears, my secrets. I told him things I couldn't even tell my parents. The family saw their relationship as heartwarming, a testament to the strength of family bonds. What they didn't see were the subtle changes that began when Sarah turned 16. Uncle Michael started buying her gifts that seemed a little too personal, jewelry that was too expensive for a niece, perfume that was too mature for a teenager. He began insisting on driving her to and from dates, claiming he wanted to protect her, and he started showing up at her bedroom door late at night, ostensibly to check on her, but lingering just a little too long. Sarah felt uncomfortable, but couldn't quite put her finger on why. After all, this was Uncle Michael, the man who had protected her all her life. I convinced myself I was imagining things, Sarah would later say. He was family. He loved me. I thought I was being paranoid. When Sarah turned 18 and graduated high school, Uncle Michael was there in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. That night, at her graduation party, he pulled her aside and told her how proud he was of the woman she was becoming. His hand lingered on her shoulder just a moment too long, and Sarah felt that familiar discomfort. But she pushed it down. College provided some distance. Sarah attended Ohio State University, majoring in elementary education like her mother. She threw herself into her studies, made new friends, and began dating a young man named David Collins from her psychology class. David was everything Uncle Michael wasn't. Quiet where Michael was outgoing, thoughtful where Michael was impulsive, respectful where Michael was possessive. Sarah and David's relationship blossomed slowly and naturally. They studied together in the library, took long walks around campus, and spent hours talking about their future dreams. David wanted to be a high school counselor. Sarah wanted to teach 3rd grade. They both wanted children, a house with a white picket fence, and a love that would last forever. After 3 years of dating, David proposed on Christmas Eve in front of Sarah's family Christmas tree. The ring was simple but beautiful, and Sarah's answer was immediate and joyful. The family erupted in celebration. Linda cried happy tears, Robert shook David's hand with genuine warmth, and Uncle Michael's smile seemed forced. "Congratulations, sweetheart," he said, hugging Sarah tightly. "I hope he knows how lucky he is." There was something in his voice that made Sarah's stomach tighten, but she attributed it to protective uncle syndrome. Surely he just needed time to adjust to sharing her attention. The engagement period should have been the happiest time of Sarah's life, but Uncle Michael's behaviour became increasingly strange. He inserted himself into every wedding decision, offering opinions on venues, dresses, and guest lists. He volunteered to pay for portions of the wedding that David's family couldn't afford, making generous offers that the cash-strapped family couldn't refuse. He was everywhere, Sarah remembered. Every time David and I tried to have a private moment to plan our wedding, Uncle Michael would appear with suggestions or concerns. Most disturbing was Uncle Michael's attitude toward David. The man who had once scared away teenage boys with protective fervour now seemed determined to undermine Sarah's fiancé at every turn. He would make subtle comments about David's financial prospects, question his commitment to Sarah, and even suggest that Sarah might be rushing into marriage too young. "Maybe you should wait another year," Uncle Michael would say. "You're only 21, there's so much life to experience." David, for his part, tried to be respectful and understanding. He knew how important Uncle Michael was to Sarah, how much she loved and trusted him. But privately, he confided to Sarah that something felt off. "I can't put my finger on it," he told her one evening as they walked through campus. "But your uncle, he looks at you differently than other family members look at their nieces." Sarah defended Uncle Michael immediately, but David's words planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't quite shake. As the wedding date approached, Uncle Michael's involvement became even more intense. He insisted on helping Sarah choose her wedding dress, sitting outside the fitting room and giving his opinions on each option. He wanted to escort her down the aisle alongside her father, claiming that he had been like a second father to her. When Sarah gently declined, saying that tradition called for just her father, Uncle Michael's face darkened with what looked like genuine hurt, and something else Sarah couldn't identify. 3 weeks before the wedding, Uncle Michael approached Sarah with what he called a special request. He had booked a suite at the wedding venue's hotel and wanted to throw Sarah a private family celebration the night before the wedding. Just the two of them. "It's our last chance to spend time together before everything changes," he said, his hand resting on her arm. "Once you're married, you won't have time for your old uncle anymore." The request made Sarah deeply uncomfortable, but she couldn't articulate why without sounding paranoid or ungrateful. She declined politely, saying she wanted to spend her last night as a single woman with her bridesmaids. Uncle Michael's response was immediate and intense, a flash of anger that was quickly masked by hurt disappointment. "Of course," he said, his voice tight. "I understand. Your new family is more important now." The guilt that followed that conversation would haunt Sarah for years to come. September 15th, 2001, dawned crisp and clear. A perfect autumn day for a wedding. Sarah woke up in her childhood bedroom for the last time as a single woman, surrounded by her bridesmaids and filled with nervous excitement. The morning was a whirlwind of hair appointments, makeup applications, and the kind of joyful chaos that surrounds every bride on her wedding day. Her mother cried while fastening the buttons on Sarah's dress, her father practiced his father of the bride speech in the mirror, and her bridesmaids took endless photos of every moment. Uncle Michael arrived early at the church, looking handsome in his dark suit and carrying a bouquet of white roses for Sarah. "For the most beautiful bride in the world," he said, kissing her cheek. But the kiss lingered a moment too long, and Sarah felt that familiar, uncomfortable feeling. She pushed it aside. This was her wedding day, and she was determined to focus on joy, not on vague feelings of unease that she couldn't explain. The ceremony was everything Sarah had dreamed it would be. The church was filled with golden afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and David waited at the altar, looking like he could barely contain his happiness. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, promises they had written themselves about love, trust, and building a life together. But throughout the ceremony, Sarah could feel Uncle Michael's eyes on her. When she dared to glance in his direction, his expression was intense, almost possessive. It was the look of a man watching something slip away from him, and it made Sarah's hands tremble as she held David's. She tried to focus on her new husband's face, on the love and adoration she saw there, but Uncle Michael's stare was like a weight on her shoulders. The reception was held at a beautiful country club just outside of town. Sarah and David had their first dance to At Last by Etta James, spinning slowly on the dance floor while their families and friends watched with joy and tears. It should have been a perfect moment, but when the song ended and other couples joined them on the dance floor, Uncle Michael immediately approached and asked Sarah for the next dance. "I've been waiting for this dance for 23 years, he said, as he pulled her into his arms. The comment struck Sarah as odd, but she smiled politely and allowed him to lead her around the floor. But Uncle Michael held her closer than appropriate for an uncle and niece, his hand pressing against the small of her back, his face too close to hers. When he spoke, his breath was warm against her ear. "You look so beautiful tonight, Sarah. So grown up. So ready." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she told herself she was overreacting. This was her wedding day. Surely she was just stressed and reading too much into innocent family affection. As the evening progressed, Uncle Michael's behaviour became more concerning. He monopolised Sarah's time, cutting in on her dances with other family members and friends. When David's college friends wanted to take photos with the bride, Uncle Michael inserted himself into every shot. When Sarah tried to spend time with her new in-laws, Uncle Michael appeared at her elbow with urgent requests for her attention. Most unsettling was the way he watched her throughout the night. Sarah would catch him staring from across the room, his expression intense and unreadable. When she smiled and waved, trying to maintain normalcy, he would raise his champagne glass in a toast that somehow felt more like a threat than a celebration. David noticed too, and as the night wore on, Sarah could see the concern growing in her new husband's eyes. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Uncle Michael approached Sarah and David with an unexpected announcement. He had taken it upon himself to upgrade their honeymoon suite at the hotel, paying for a larger room with better amenities. "Nothing's too good for my favourite niece," he said, handing Sarah a keycard. "I hope you'll be very happy tonight." The way he emphasised the word happy made Sarah's skin crawl, but she thanked him politely and accepted the keycard. What Sarah didn't know was that Uncle Michael had not just upgraded their suite. He had also booked the room directly adjacent to theirs, and he had made sure to request a key to their room from the hotel desk, claiming he needed access to deliver a special wedding surprise. The stage was set for a betrayal that would shatter Sarah's world forever. Sarah and David arrived at their honeymoon suite just after midnight, exhausted but happy, ready to begin their new life together. The upgraded room was beautiful, a spacious suite with a sitting area, a king-sized bed covered in rose petals, and champagne chilling in an ice bucket. They changed out of their wedding clothes, Sarah into a white silk nightgown her mother had given her, David into comfortable pajamas. They sat on the couch, sharing champagne and reliving the highlights of their wedding day. David told Sarah how beautiful she had looked walking down the aisle, how proud he was to be her husband, how excited he was about their future together. Sarah felt the stress of the day melting away as she curled up against her new husband's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling truly safe and loved for the first time all day. Around 2 a.m, David fell asleep on the couch, emotionally and physically drained from the long day. Sarah covered him with a blanket and kissed his forehead, then prepared to get ready for bed herself. She was brushing her teeth in the bathroom when she heard the suite door open. Assuming David had woken up and was coming to bed, she called out softly, "I'll be right there, honey." But the voice that answered wasn't David's. "It's not David, sweetheart. It's Uncle Michael." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She dropped her toothbrush and rushed to the bathroom door, peering out to see Uncle Michael standing in the middle of their honeymoon suite, still dressed in his wedding attire but with his tie loosened and his shirt partially unbuttoned. "Uncle Michael, what are you doing here?" Sarah whispered, glancing toward the couch where David was still sleeping peacefully. "How did you get in?" Uncle Michael held up a keycard, the same type Sarah had in her purse. "I told the hotel I needed to deliver a special wedding gift," he said, his voice different from any tone she had ever heard from him before. Gone was the warm, protective uncle voice she had known all her life. In its place was something darker, more possessive. "I think you should leave," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "David and I are tired, and tomorrow is our flight to Hawaii." But Uncle Michael didn't move toward the door. Instead, he stepped closer to the bathroom, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "We need to talk, Sarah. Just you and me. We've needed to have this conversation for a long time." "What conversation?" Sarah asked, her heart beginning to race. Something was very wrong, but she still couldn't quite process what was happening. This was Uncle Michael, the man who had read her bedtime stories, taught her to ride a bicycle, walked her to her first day of school. Whatever was happening couldn't be what her instincts were telling her it was. "You know what conversation," Uncle Michael said, taking another step closer. "About us. About what we mean to each other. About what we've always meant to each other." Sarah shook her head, backing further into the bathroom. "I don't know what you're talking about, Uncle Michael. You're scaring me. Please leave." But Uncle Michael's expression hardened. "Don't pretend you don't know, Sarah. Don't pretend you haven't felt it too. The connection between us. The way we understand each other. The way I've loved you. Really loved you. Since you were 16. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. "You're my uncle," she whispered. "You're family. You're supposed to protect me." Uncle Michael's laugh was bitter and cold. "Protect you? I've done nothing but protect you your whole life. I've scared away boys who weren't good enough for you. I've been there for every important moment. And now you've married this boy who can't possibly love you the way I do." Sarah realized with growing horror that David was still unconscious on the couch, unaware of the nightmare unfolding just feet away. She was trapped in the bathroom with nowhere to go, and the man she had trusted more than anyone in the world was revealing himself to be a stranger. A dangerous stranger with intentions that made her stomach turn. "Uncle Michael, please," she begged. "Just leave. We can pretend this never happened. We can—" But he cut her off, his voice taking on a tone of finality that chilled her to the bone. "We can't pretend anymore, Sarah. Tonight, everything changes. Tonight, you're going to understand what real love feels like." What happened next in that honeymoon suite would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. The man who had been her protector, her hero, her trusted family member, became her attacker. In the space where she should have felt safest, on the night that should have been the most beautiful of her life. Uncle Michael stole something from Sarah that could never be returned. He forced himself into a moment that wasn't his. He violated the sacred trust of family, the sanctity of her marriage, and the safety of the one place she should have been protected. The details of what happened are too painful and too private to share. But the impact was immediate and devastating. In the span of 30 minutes, Sarah's entire world collapsed. When it was over, Uncle Michael straightened his clothes and looked down at Sarah with a mixture of satisfaction and possessiveness that made her feel sick. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "Now you know what real love feels like. David could never love you the way I do. No one could." He placed the keycard on the dresser and walked toward the door, pausing to look back one final time. "This is our secret, Sarah. Our special secret. And you'll keep it, because you know what will happen to this family if you don't." Sarah sat on the bathroom floor, shaking and unable to process what had just happened. David was still asleep on the couch, unaware that his new wife's life had just been shattered beyond recognition. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to call the police. But Uncle Michael's final words echoed in her mind. What would happen to her family if she told the truth? Would anyone believe her? Would they blame her? Would they say she had somehow encouraged it? The shame was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah felt dirty, violated, and somehow responsible for what had happened. She had been taught all her life to trust family, to respect her elders, to keep family problems within the family. The very foundations of everything she believed about trust and safety had been destroyed in one night, by the one person she had trusted most. She managed to shower and put on clean clothes, moving like a robot through motions that felt surreal and disconnected from reality. By the time David woke up, Sarah had composed herself enough to appear normal, though she felt anything but normal. When he asked why she hadn't woken him to come to bed, she lied and said she hadn't been tired. The honeymoon in Hawaii was a nightmare disguised as a dream vacation. David was loving and attentive, excited about their new marriage and eager to be intimate with his new wife. But every time he touched Sarah, she flinched. Every time he tried to be romantic, she found excuses to avoid closeness. She spent most of the week staring at the ocean, wondering how her life had been destroyed so completely and so quickly. David knew something was wrong, but Sarah's explanations, that she was tired, that she was overwhelmed by the wedding, that she needed time to adjust to being married, seemed reasonable enough. He was patient and understanding, giving her space while making it clear that he loved her and was there for her whenever she was ready to talk. But Sarah wasn't ready to talk. She wasn't sure she would ever be ready to talk. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that your wedding night was destroyed by the family member he had tried to warn you about? How do you admit that your instincts had been wrong, that your trust had been misplaced, that the person you had defended was actually a predator? When Sarah and David returned from their honeymoon, normal life was supposed to resume. They moved into a small apartment near the school where Sarah had been hired to teach third grade. David started his job as a counselor at the local high school. On the surface, everything looked perfect. A young couple starting their life together, surrounded by family and friends who loved them. But Sarah was living a double life. In public, she smiled and played the role of the happy newlywed. She attended family dinners where Uncle Michael sat across the table, making normal conversation and acting as if nothing had changed. She listened to her mother talk about how wonderful it was that Sarah had such a close relationship with her uncle, how lucky she was to have a family member who cared so much about her happiness. Uncle Michael, for his part, acted as if the assault had never happened. He was the same charming, attentive uncle he had always been, with one crucial difference. Now his attention felt like a threat. When he hugged Sarah goodbye after family gatherings, his hands lingered too long. When he spoke to her, there was an undercurrent of possession in his voice that made her skin crawl. And always, there were the looks, the meaningful glances that reminded Sarah of their secret. The worst part was how normal everyone else thought everything was. Sarah's parents continued to rely on Uncle Michael for family events and decisions. David, who had once been suspicious of Uncle Michael's behavior, seemed to have let his guard down now that Sarah was safely married. The family dynamic continued exactly as it had before, except that Sarah now knew the truth about the man everyone trusted and loved. At home, Sarah struggled to be intimate with her new husband. Every time David touched her, she was transported back to that hotel room, reliving the nightmare of her wedding night. She began finding excuses to avoid physical closeness. She was tired, she had a headache, she was stressed about work. David was patient at first, but as weeks turned into months, his concern grew. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said one evening, after she had once again pulled away from his embrace. "Something is wrong, and I can't help you if you won't tell me what it is." Sarah wanted desperately to tell him, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that their marriage had been violated before it had even truly begun? How could she burden him with the knowledge that would destroy his relationship with her family? Instead, she made up stories about adjusting to married life, about stress from work, about needing time to feel comfortable with intimacy. David accepted her explanations because he loved her and trusted her, but Sarah could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. She was destroying their marriage to protect a secret that was destroying her soul. The isolation was overwhelming. Sarah had always been close to her family, but now family gatherings were exercises in pretending everything was normal while sitting across from her attacker. She had friends, but how could she explain why she had suddenly become withdrawn and distant? She had a husband who loved her, but she couldn't bear to let him touch her without reliving her trauma. Sleep became elusive. Sarah would lie awake at night, replaying the assault over and over again, wondering what she could have done differently. Should she have screamed? Should she have fought harder? Should she have listened to David's initial concerns about Uncle Michael's behavior? The self-blame was constant and corrosive, eating away at her sense of self-worth and her ability to trust her own judgment. Work became her refuge. In her third-grade classroom, surrounded by innocent children who saw her as their teacher and protector, Sarah could momentarily forget about her own trauma. She threw herself into her job with an intensity that worried her colleagues, staying late to prepare lessons and volunteering for every extra duty available. If she could save these children, teach them to trust their instincts and speak up when something was wrong, maybe she could find some meaning in her own suffering. But even at work, the trauma followed her. When parents came to pick up their children, Sarah found herself studying the family dynamics, looking for signs of inappropriate relationships or concerning behavior. She became hyper-aware of how adults touched children, how they spoke to them, how they looked at them. The innocence she had once seen in family relationships was gone forever. As the first year of marriage passed, Uncle Michael's behavior escalated. The assault on Sarah's wedding night had not been an isolated incident. It had been the beginning of a pattern that would continue for years. He had learned that Sarah would keep his secrets, that her shame and fear were stronger than her desire to seek help. And he used that knowledge to continue his abuse. Family events became opportunities for Uncle Michael to assert his power over Sarah. At Christmas dinner, he would find excuses to be alone with her in the kitchen, pressing himself against her while she washed dishes and whispering reminders of their special relationship. At birthday parties, he would insist on giving Sarah private gifts, jewelry and perfume that felt like marks of ownership rather than family affection. The most insidious part of the ongoing abuse was how Uncle Michael used family loyalty as a weapon. "You wouldn't want to hurt your parents, would you?" he would say when Sarah tried to resist his advances. "Your father looks up to me. Your mother thinks of me as her second son. Imagine what it would do to them to know the truth about what you really are." He twisted Sarah's love for her family into chains that bound her to silence. Sarah began having panic attacks. They would start with a racing heart and sweating palms, escalating to full-blown episodes where she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't function. The first time it happened was at a family barbecue, when Uncle Michael cornered her in the garage and put his hands on her. She excused herself to the bathroom and spent 20 minutes trying to calm down, splashing cold water on her face and fighting to regain control. David noticed the panic attacks, of course. He was a counselor. He knew the signs of trauma and anxiety. But when he tried to talk to Sarah about getting help, about seeing a therapist or doctor, she refused. "I'm fine," she would insist. "It's just stress from work. It's just the adjustment to married life. It's nothing serious." How could she explain that the panic attacks were her body's way of screaming about a violation she couldn't voice? The lies became a constant part of Sarah's existence. She lied to David about why she didn't want to attend family gatherings. She lied to her parents about why she seemed distant and distracted. She lied to her friends about why she had become so withdrawn. And most destructively, she lied to herself about why she continued to endure the abuse instead of fighting back. Uncle Michael was careful to never leave physical evidence of his assaults. There were no bruises or marks that would raise questions, just the invisible wounds that were slowly destroying Sarah's spirit. He was also careful to maintain his public image as the devoted uncle, the family man who had never married because he was too busy taking care of his loved ones. To the outside world, he was a pillar of the community. A successful businessman who sponsored little league teams and donated to local charities. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. How could this man, who was revered by everyone she knew, be the same man who violated her in dark corners and empty rooms? How could the person who had once made her feel safe be the source of her deepest terror? Sarah began to question her own sanity, wondering if she was somehow misinterpreting normal family affection or if she was being overly dramatic about incidents that weren't really that serious. As the second year of her marriage began, Sarah's relationship with David continued to deteriorate. She loved him desperately, but she couldn't be the wife he deserved while carrying the weight of Uncle Michael's abuse. Their physical relationship remained strained, their emotional connection weakened by Sarah's inability to be honest about what was destroying her from the inside out. David tried everything he could think of to reach his wife. He planned romantic evenings, surprised her with thoughtful gifts, and created opportunities for them to reconnect. But every gesture of love only highlighted for Sarah what she was losing, the marriage she should have had, the happiness that had been stolen from her, the trust that had been destroyed before their life together had even truly begun. 3 years into their marriage, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been joyful. She and David had talked about starting a family, and they both loved children. But for Sarah, the pregnancy brought a new level of terror. She was going to be responsible for protecting an innocent child, but she couldn't even protect herself. What if Uncle Michael turned his attention to her child? What if the pattern of abuse continued into the next generation? The pregnancy also made it impossible for Sarah to continue avoiding physical closeness with David. As her body changed and her emotions became more volatile due to hormones, the facade she had been maintaining for 3 years began to crack. She found herself crying at unexpected moments, snapping at David over minor issues, and experiencing waves of anxiety that were impossible to hide. David's concern reached a breaking point one evening when Sarah had a severe panic attack during a routine family dinner. Uncle Michael had cornered her in the hallway, putting his hands on her growing belly and making comments about how beautiful she looked pregnant. The violation of her pregnancy, the threat to her unborn child, sent Sarah into a spiral of terror that she couldn't control. She made it through dinner by sheer force of will, but the moment they got home, Sarah collapsed on their bathroom floor, hyperventilating and unable to speak. David held her while she shook, whispering reassurances and begging her to tell him what was wrong. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah almost broke her silence. The words were right there, waiting to spill out. But at the last moment, her fear was stronger than her desperation. "I can't do this anymore," David said that night as they lay in bed, Sarah curled away from him as she had been for years. "I love you, Sarah. I love you more than my own life. But you're disappearing, and I don't know how to help you. We're about to have a baby together, and I feel like I'm losing you a little more every day." The pain in his voice broke Sarah's heart, but still she couldn't find the words to explain what was destroying their marriage. The situation reached a crisis point when Sarah was 7 months pregnant. At a family celebration for her father's birthday, Uncle Michael waited until Sarah was alone in the kitchen and assaulted her more aggressively than he ever had before. Sarah fought back for the first time, pushing him away and telling him to stop. But he was stronger, and her pregnant body was clumsy and vulnerable. When it was over, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just protecting herself. She was protecting her unborn child. The motherly instincts that were developing along with her pregnancy gave her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. For the first time since her wedding night, Sarah felt anger instead of just shame. This man had stolen enough from her. He wasn't going to steal her child's safety too. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter she had been composing in her head for 3 years, but had never had the courage to put on paper. In it, she detailed every assault, every threat, every moment of abuse that Uncle Michael had subjected her to. She wrote about her wedding night, about the ongoing pattern of violation, about the fear that had controlled her life for so long. But even as she wrote the letter, Sarah couldn't bring herself to give it to anyone. What if they didn't believe her? What if they blamed her for not speaking up sooner? What if the revelation destroyed her parents' relationship with Uncle Michael and tore the family apart? The fear that had kept her silent for 3 years was still stronger than her desire for justice. Sarah hid the letter in a box at the back of her closet, along with other evidence she had been secretly collecting: hotel keycards, photos that showed Uncle Michael's inappropriate behavior, and a journal where she had been documenting each assault. It was the insurance policy she hoped she would never need to use, but also a lifeline that gave her a sense of control over her own story. Sarah's daughter Emma Rose Collins was born on a crisp October morning, 3.5 years after the wedding night that had changed everything. The moment Sarah held her daughter for the first time, she felt a fierce protective love that dwarfed every other emotion she had ever experienced. This perfect, innocent child was depending on her for everything: for safety, for protection, for love. And Sarah made a silent promise that no one would ever hurt Emma the way Uncle Michael had hurt her. David was a devoted father from the moment Emma was born. He took family leave from work to help care for the baby, and Sarah watched him cradle their daughter with such tenderness that it broke her heart. This was the man she had married, the man whose love she had been unable to fully accept because of Uncle Michael's abuse. Seeing David with Emma made Sarah realize how much her silence had cost not just her, but her entire family. Uncle Michael, predictably, was eager to be involved in Emma's life. He showed up at the hospital within hours of the birth, carrying an elaborate bouquet of flowers and an expensive teddy bear. He wanted to hold Emma, to take photos with her, to establish himself as the doting great-uncle just as he had once been Sarah's doting uncle. But for the first time in years, Sarah found her voice. "No," she said firmly when Uncle Michael reached for the baby. "I don't want you to hold her." The family was shocked. Sarah had never spoken to Uncle Michael with anything but respect and affection. David looked confused but supportive, while Sarah's parents exchanged worried glances. Uncle Michael's expression darkened for just a moment before he forced a smile and said he understood that new mothers could be overprotective. But Sarah's refusal to let Uncle Michael near Emma was just the beginning. She began declining family invitations where she knew he would be present, making excuses about the baby's schedule or her own exhaustion. When Uncle Michael offered to babysit Emma so Sarah and David could have date nights, Sarah's answer was an immediate and non-negotiable no. Her family began to notice the change in her behavior, and questions started being asked. "Sarah seems different lately," her mother confided to David one afternoon when she came to visit Emma. "She's so protective of the baby, almost paranoid. And she's been avoiding family gatherings. Is everything okay between you two?" David assured his mother-in-law that everything was fine, but privately he was becoming increasingly concerned about his wife's behavior and mental state. The truth was that motherhood had awakened something fierce in Sarah, a mama bear instinct that overrode even her deepest fears. Every time she looked at Emma's innocent face, she remembered what it felt like to trust completely, to believe that family members were safe, to have faith that the adults in her life would protect her. She would die before she let Uncle Michael destroy that innocence the way he had destroyed hers. Sarah began researching child protection, reading everything she could about warning signs of abuse and how to keep children safe from predators. What she learned terrified her. Most child abuse was committed by family members or trusted adults. Most victims never reported their abuse. Most abusers were skilled at grooming their victims and maintaining public facades that made them seem trustworthy. Everything she read confirmed her worst fears about Uncle Michael and strengthened her resolve to protect Emma at all costs. But living in constant hypervigilance was exhausting. Sarah barely slept, afraid to leave Emma alone even with David. She couldn't concentrate at work, distracted by worry about who might have access to her daughter. She lost weight, developed chronic headaches, and found herself snapping at David over minor issues. The stress of keeping her secret while protecting Emma from a threat that only she understood was slowly breaking her down. The situation reached a crisis point when Emma was 6 months old. At Christmas dinner, Uncle Michael cornered Sarah in the hallway while she was carrying the baby. "She's beautiful," he said, reaching out to touch Emma's face. "She looks just like you did at that age. So innocent, so trusting." The way he looked at Emma, the tone in his voice, the possessive gleam in his eyes. It was exactly the same way he had looked at Sarah when she was 16. Sarah jerked away from Uncle Michael so violently that Emma started crying. "Don't touch her," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage and terror. "Don't ever touch my daughter." Uncle Michael's facade slipped for just a moment, revealing the predator underneath. "Now, Sarah," he said quietly, "don't be dramatic. I'm family. I would never hurt Emma any more than I hurt you." The threat was clear, and it was the final straw. That night, after Christmas dinner ended in awkward tension, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't live with the secret anymore, not when it meant putting Emma at risk.